Before we begin, since this is a BBC-owned property, I feel the need to point out that the news arm of the BBC has a continuing issue with transphobic leanings in its news coverage. You can find in a pinned comment below various videos from both myself and other YouTubers covering this issue. And while I understand that the Doctor Who creative team is not responsible for this, I will continue to point this out for as long as it remains a consistent issue. Thank you. Spies, fascists, and data collection. Oh my. Spyfall Part 2. The conclusion of the first two-part story of the Jodie Whittaker era. And I wasn't really sure what I was going to get out of this. That's kind of where I'm at with a lot of Series 12, because my overall takeaway impression of Series 12 was this is definitely better than Series 11 for the most part, up until the finale, but let's not get ahead of ourselves. But I didn't know, going back and revisiting it, how much of it was going to be, is that because it was genuinely strong material? Was it just a little bit better, or was it just capturing a feel that I wanted more, that I was overlooking some problems? And in the case of this part 2, at least, it's at least a little bit of that last thing. Because watching this now, without the thrill of getting to see Sacha Dhawan really own as the Master, because I like him a lot as the Master, without that really hitting for the first time and being like, oh, this is so exciting, and actually examining it more as an actual piece of fiction, as a narrative, you know what it is? It's overstuffed, which is going to be a bit of a recurring issue for Chibnall, especially going forward, which is odd because Series 11, I don't think you could really accuse of being overstuffed. Maybe you could accuse Battle of Renskorav Kolos being overstuffed, insofar as there were a lot of ideas in there that should have been expanded on and could have been the bulk of the episode. Things like the psychic planet, which ultimately meant nothing. So these ideas just kind of get thrown away. But it felt more undercooked than overstuffed. Here, there's frankly too much going on, and things don't pay off properly because they're kind of stepping on each other's toes. Basically, what that mostly boils down to is that the Master kind of just devours the rest of the story, because we've still got all this holdover stuff from Barton the tech guy, and with this new species that we're now dealing with, and it taking out spies, and it's all over the planet, all this stuff going on with there, and that's technically still present, and it does, from a strictly checkbox sort of thing, does get wrapped up, but it feels like it's wrapped up as a side note because we've got the Master now. So we're going to focus the Master front and center and include this entire, let's have the Master and the Doctor encounter each other across multiple points in history, which is fun, don't get me wrong, in isolation with those scenes. But those scenes aren't an active part of the narrative that have been going on up to this point. So they take away from the time that is available to actually tell the story that the first one was, and actually deal with all that. The Master wasn't intrusive in part 1 because we didn't even know he was there until the very end. Here, he's here from the beginning, and while I love all of his scenes, it really does feel like he has just taken over and robbed the other stories of feeling like they are properly dealt with, which is part of why this feels particularly overloaded with Technobabble.
If I use my sonic on the Silver Lady, I might be able to force this creature to throw me back to the 21st century.
I mean, Technobabble is something that can affect any era of Doctor Who, to be completely honest. But in this particular case, in order to tie together and explain all the things like what the Master's plan even is, how the Doctor keeps running into him like teaming up with the Nazis and not being called out by them. I'm going to come back to that whole scene, but we got to deal with that. The Doctor runs into Ada and then, jumps ahead and runs into Nor. Why is that happening? Why is Ada connected with this species? What are the Kasavan even trying to accomplish? Why is Barton working with them? Why does he think it's a good idea? All these things kind of sort of get touched on, but because a lot of them have complicated answers, particularly what the Kasavan are, where they come from, what they're trying to accomplish, what Barton is hoping to get out of this, to explain those things in the cut down amount of time because of how much time is just eaten up by Sacha Dhawan means that we just get technobabble dumps. The Doctor just says a bunch of nonsense tech sounding terms that are meant to explain why that's a thing, where honestly, the much cleaner thing would have been to simplify it and take some of these things out. Like, I don't dislike the stuff with Ada or the stuff with Nor, but it's not adding anything, and having it there is removing the ability of this other stuff to be able to move forward in a way that doesn't feel rushed and ham-fisted. So that's sort of the overstuffed problem that's going on with this episode. But that's the massive structural issue. Again, though, I really do like Sacha Dhawan's master, like a lot. And I love, there's a lot of subtlety in both his performance and Whittaker's performance when he has her kneel and he tells her to call him by his name. She just has this exhausted, it's a borderline eye roll, this
Master.
Like, she can't believe she's saying this. And then, meets his eyes when he's like, what? Sorry, what was that? So, like, him pulling it out of her and the look in her eyes when she meets his gaze. Oh, there's a lot going on in there in that interaction. And it plays really, really well. In many ways, this kind of feels like an amalgamation of stuff that's worked elsewhere. The reveal of the Master from someone we thought was an ally, that's pulled from Utopia. The Master, having this whole bring the Doctor down to their knees, that's very much the Sound of Drums Trial of a Time Lord. The visual language of the Kasavan is very Army of Ghosts. The mass adoption of a piece of technology to take over the world is very Age of Steel. The resolution of the plane is very Blink. And I don't want to have that sound too dismissive because despite the overstuffed issue, which I brought up, but like, these aren't bad elements to pull from. And there's nothing wrong with reusing them. Doctor Who has been around for almost 60 years now. It's totally okay to repurpose some ideas. That's fine. But I'm not sure how much more is going on other than the repurposing. Because like the other stuff that's here, again, just feels very rushed. We have the Technobabble explanations. And then with Barton, we have this weird scene with him and his mother that feels like, honestly, a motivation equivalent of a Technobabble scene. Whereas the Technobabble scenes are used to explain why the Doctor's jumping through time or didn't make it all the way to the present or whatever, and we just drop some Technobabble. Here, we have Barton have this confrontation with his mother because I guess they feel like just a man wanting to be in control of the world isn't enough motivation. So we have to give him mother issues in this one scene where it really doesn't feel like it's a proper culmination of anything or even a deep explanation. It's just like, oh, okay, so yeah, issues. Got it. That didn't really add anything. I mean, like it might have if there had been more time to bring Barton forward and have him be the primary villain of the entire two-parter instead of just the first one and actually delved into him a bit more as a character. But again, we don't have time. We've got the Master now. So, okay, we need to talk about the Nazi scene. Because this is something that I didn't pick up on, the thing that a lot of people ended up having issue with later, because, back when I first saw it, because I don't watch other people's reviews and it didn't occur to me at the time. So there is some concern about how it reflects on this particular Doctor's moral compass, that in the process of defeating him, she removed, because it gets pointed out, like, you're not exactly an Aryan poster child. And he says, I'm using a perception filter. They see what they think they should see when they look at this uniform. And she disables that perception filter and leaves him to the Nazis.
Nice on perception filter. Very easy to jam. Now they'll see the real you. Good luck.
Which means she sort of weaponized racial hatred against somebody. And even somebody like the Master, that is a bit okay. Here's the thing that makes it weirder for me. She didn't have to do that. Because she'd already cooked his goose. Because she did this whole thing with sending a message that she knew the Germans would intercept, implicating him as be like, thanks so much for all the spying you've been doing for us over here in the UK.
Sent a message to the Brits, telling them how valuable you've been as a double agent.
She'd already removed his ability to just hide there. She'd already cooked his goose. So the entire removal of the perception filter is completely unnecessary. That's honestly what makes it weirder to me. It would already be a weird decision if that was the thing that she did to get the Nazis to turn on him. But the fact that she'd already turned them against him and still did that too, that makes it real weird. I don't think there's a lot of specific malicious intent behind that. I think there is a lack of thought. I think that this was an idea that was had, and the implications of what this says about what this doctor is willing to do, what line she's willing to cross, what kinds of evil she's willing to weaponize, I don't think those things were thought through. Not that the doctor has ever been above weaponizing evil against another foe. That is definitely something that has happened a number of times, but something about it being genocidal racial hatred and real life genocidal racial hatred in particular, it just feels really inappropriate. And I don't know, there's something about the Master that didn't, honestly, even before that part, didn't quite feel right, him in that uniform. Because that's not who the Master is. The Master's power hungry. The Master is opportunistic. The Master is scheming. He's not genocidal. Not as an end to itself. He has no problem wiping out entire species at all. But like, that's not his deal. And Doctor Who already has direct comparisons to the Nazis with the Daleks. If you wanted to have somebody infiltrating the Nazis, Davros is a much better pick for that than the Master is. At the same time, like, the Master's not above this. It's not like he's too good for this if he thinks that this will give him an advantage. So I'm not going to say it's out of character. It just feels like they're trying to associate him with a real world evil that doesn't map right onto him, especially given that there are other villains in Doctor Who that it does map onto. Again, the actual scene when we have the interactions between the Master and the Doctor in that portion are really good. The Master and the amount of just kind of knife twisting he's trying to do to her, and little things like him asking,
Did I ever apologize for that?
No?
Good.
You get that sense that they used to be friends, which is something I like in a Master Doctor scene. And the best ones have that. And so like their interactions are still really good, but I kind of suspect a lot of that is down to the performance. Because when I think about the actual construction of the scene, I kind of tilt my head a little bit at some of this. And I think, you know what? It's not just that the Master kind of takes over the story. It's that what he's doing doesn't mesh and flow with what the Kasavan and what Barton are doing, either logistically or thematically. And it's like the logistical not all meshing together is fine. He's using them for his own purposes. That's a thing he does. But there was a really strong thematic core when you were looking at Barton and the Kasavan, because the Kasavan honestly kind of had a Cold War thing going for them. This implanting of spies everywhere. We put people everywhere and we listen and we watch and we gather information, and sort of mirroring that with data collection through technology like Barton's doing through Vor. I still can't believe they use that without Googling what the heck that means. Those two things mesh thematically very well. Old school spycraft, modern era data collection. The Master is just here to mess with the Doctor, basically. Like, technically his plan is not just that, but that is what he's focused on. That's what he's spending almost his entire time here doing. So I think that's part of the reason why it feels like he's pulling away from the other villains, because what he's doing doesn't match what they're doing. And so we're losing a very relevant theme of villainy over here so that we can focus on the master. I feel like the better call would have been to reveal the master maybe towards the end of the second part of this so that the time could be properly devoted to wrapping up the actual plot that most of the rest of it was. And then we do an episode after this dedicated to the master and give him a full spotlight so he's not just pulling focus from other things, which is kind of what we end up with. There's some other things, both good and bad. I kind of like that the doctor's all disapproving of Ada as Ada gets, this machine gun and then a grenade, and the doctor's like, I do not approve, but you know what? This is helpful, so she's gonna do it anyway. So there was a fun to that I enjoyed. There was a weird moment of interaction between Ryan and Graham.
Ryan's right. We carry on doing what the doc would want us to do.
Sorry, did you just say Ryan's right?
Yes, I did. Enjoy the moment, son.
Maybe it's been too long since I did my rewatch on Series 11, but I don't remember Graham assuming Ryan was wrong about everything being a running thing. Maybe my memory's just failing at me. It felt like an odd thing to highlight. We get our first proper drop and really reference to the importance of the timeless child, which was a term actually heard in the previous series, but it gets emphasis here, and it's the lie of the timeless child. And stick a pin in this because I'm going to have to come back to it eventually. I'm still trying to struggle as to why this matters so much to the master. And I don't love that Gallifrey got destroyed again. Like, can we pick something and just leave it alone? Especially because so little ever happens at Gallifrey, especially in the modern era. It's not like we do entire stories set there. Either have it be safe somewhere off where it's not going to bother the rest of the story, or have it stay destroyed. But this whole, it's destroyed, it's back, it's safe, but it's in a separate bubble universe. I found it and I destroyed it. I'm like, for God's sake, this thing's like a kickball. It's just getting knocked back and forth between these states of it's fine and it's destroyed. I'm like, I have no investment in this at this point. And like Chibnall, I would say, did not even try. He's banking on a pre-existing investment in Gallifrey when it's a setting he hasn't done anything with. I don't know. That we're going to deal a lot more with that later on anyways. I do kind of like that the doctor kind of has her clamming up at the end of this when the companions are like, hey, do you want to talk to us about what we just went through? And the doctor's like, no. And then she gives an answer, but it's a very bullet point answer. Like, okay, well, here's the thing. Here's what's going on. Here's the master. Here's the deal. Any other questions? It's very off-putting. And now knowing how much of a actual intended part of the character that she is very bad at relating, especially emotionally, when something is weighing on her. I think that's pretty well handled. One could argue it's sort of clunky and like checking boxes, but it makes sense to me because she's treating answering these questions not as a way to unburden herself emotionally, but going through a checklist of, okay, here's the things you need to know. Can we be done? And I think that fits for how she's being characterized at this point. But yeah, it's a bit of a letdown from part one, unfortunately. But that's Spyfall part 2. Have you rewatched it lately? What did you think about it? Whatever your thoughts are, drop something down in the comments. Let's talk about it. Patreon is what pays the bills and enables me to do this as my living. Any amount you can support me there is of great assistance. Even if you can't, though, like, share, subscribe also help me out, but don't worry too much about that either. Because what I really want you to remember is that you are beautiful, you are valid, and you are loved. You are the council. I'm just running the meetings, and until next time, this council is adjourned. End of the video, so I gotta shout out my top patrons. Robin Moore, Zubin Lutfulla, Tarak, the thing that goes doink in the anime, Oliver B., Angus Bjarnason, Melinda Walters, Imudelki, The Oath of Boyd, Katoria, Toy Lowly, Becky Sparks, Fernambulax the Poodle, Zach, Tracy Scrabbit, Angry Casperl, Tim Price, Adam R.D.L. Taylor, Shayla Gourlay, and Brendan LaRose. Thanks for your support. If you want to hear me probably mispronounce your name as well, check out the rewards on the Patreon. How you doing there?